Hey, what's going on, guys? Okay, so this video that I'm doing is to show you guys how the utilization work, because a lot of you are under the impression that the 58% is only for Manhattan below 96th Street. That is not the case. The 58% is for all of New York City, all 5 boroughs simultaneously. So the apps have to maintain this as set per the TLC, unfortunately, which is what leads to them having to lock out drivers because they have to maintain it. Anytime they fall below it, that's what causes lockout. So, for example, the majority of drivers are rolling into Manhattan here. Oh, there we go. It's not the greatest stylist, but so you got about, I would say, any given time, maybe 30% of the fleet here in Manhattan, or even more. I would say even up to 50%, because the moment you come into Queens from Long Island, if you live in Long Island, you get locked out. If you're in Staten Island, you're coming from Jersey because you live in Jersey and you're going through Staten Island, you'll probably be locked out. It's just not enough demand there. I would say 40 to 45% of all of Uber's demand is here in the core business of Manhattan below 96th Street. Then you got the airports, LaGuardia and JFK. So this is like a whole dynamic thing. It's not a person sitting behind a screen, kicking drivers off, out of nowhere. It all depends on demand. So with the demand and the utilization, it allows a certain amount of cars to go online, which I've told you guys before, not everyone can achieve priority. It won't work for any of the apps to let all drivers achieve that, because then they can't control or maintain the utilization rate. So a couple of ideas I had to maybe help alleviate that, and I've thought of, sharing it with the TLC. I've actually applied for a position in the TLC. The opening was a policy analyst. That's where a lot of this data actually comes from. So my idea was, instead of having the utilization for all 5 boroughs, for each borough instead to have their own utilization. You got the Bronx with its own, you got Queens with its own, and you got Brooklyn with its own. 5 separate. That way, maybe Manhattan can just be 58%. You know what I'm saying? So Manhattan will be 58%. Maybe you could give the Bronx, I know the Bronx tends to be busy, maybe they could do that one at, maybe 48%. Oh man, this stylus doesn't work too well. Staten Island, they don't do as many rides compared to the other boroughs, but there are still some rides there. I would say the utilization for this one will probably have to be maybe a bit higher. But in reality, separating each borough will then allow more drivers online, as the majority drive into Manhattan. So if you got, at any given time, 30,000 cars just sitting in Manhattan, I would say between 10,000 around so might have priority, or even less. And then the rest are just cruising around, locked out during I call it the off-peak hours. So anything after 10 a.m., until maybe 2, 3 o'clock, it's not going to start picking up. So drivers will experience the most lockouts during those times, especially in the areas. You might not even be able to go on at all in Staten Island Not at all in Brooklyn. But if you are on a ride and you're going from Manhattan to Brooklyn, obviously there is a decent rider demand. I would say East New York, Bushwick, Crown Heights, Brownsville, Canarsie, this whole section here has a decent amount of rides. I think monthly they're doing over 200,000 rides out of those, just that area alone. You got Far Rockaway, as part of Queens, doing its own rides as well. It's not too much, but there are drivers there. And then you got the Southside Jamaica near JFK. There's a lot of rides there. And, with the actual ride data, I think you could get a couple, maybe a couple thousand drivers out of Manhattan online, cruising around Brooklyn and Queens, around these areas, to be able to go online, as well as the Bronx. A lot of drivers are afraid of the Bronx, unfortunately, but you guys can meet priority much easier if you can stay online if you go to the Bronx. Most of those guys tells me that do drive in the Bronx that they're able to stay online consistently and completing short trips. That's the thing, the whole thing. If there's demand, low amount of drivers, you'll be able to go online, especially if, there's a bunch of short trips, and this will help you achieve a priority. The issue that we're having is it's the 58% for all 5 boroughs, and you got people, I'll do it again, you got people sitting at the airports. They're just sitting there. I think JFK is going to have around, between 200 and 300 cars sitting there. I think LaGuardia, when I check the queue sometimes, it's probably between terminals C, D, and B and A. You probably got, anywhere 300, maybe to 400 cars, and other cars roaming in the area just waiting to get into the queue. And they're not exempt from the utilization. So they're sitting there in these airports for hours. Reason being is you got drivers coming in from Manhattan, dropping off, and they're going to get Instaping, and they're going to be able to come right back to the city with a ride. So those sitting in a queue sit in a queue much longer than they have to. Same goes for JFK. You go to JFK, especially with UberX, you should get an Instaping back out to the city or wherever else. An idea that the TLC should implement is exempt the airports from the utilization rate. Reason being is, it's, the apps can't tell you, oh, you can't wait at the airport or you can't go there. You know what I mean? We're supposed to be independent contractors. So the TLC should treat the airports as such, where we go there at will. And if we want to sit there for 8 hours or 10 hours, it shouldn't be hurting the utilization, even if it hurts at like 5 to 10%, or maybe even less. It could be probably less than 5%. It can still get more cars on. And what this will do is, more cars online, able to do more rides, will increase efficiency. But another issue I've noticed, especially on Uber, is the drivers that like to cherry pick. Any driver that's online and they're waiting for 45 plus and they're just declining and declining, they hold down, they water down the utilization rate. Lyft, for example, has a 90% acceptance rate. So that doesn't give much leeway for its drivers to cherry pick, because if they want to maintain priority, they can only decline so many rides in a week because their acceptance rates is for 7 days. So if Uber were to at least implement something similar along with their ride requirement to achieve priority, having that 90% will increase efficiency, therefore allowing more cars to go online. And that way, less drivers are locked out, and complaining or suffering, but it's a team game. It's the more efficient drivers are, you're accepting every ride, because, if you're out working, every time you have a passenger car, you're making money. Every time you don't have a passenger car, you're not making any money. And you risk getting locked out if you don't have priority. Um, and, you could easily get locked out as well if you're declining a few rides and you hit an area in Manhattan that doesn't have enough demand. You'll get kicked offline. And now you're stuck in traffic trying to go back to where there might be demand. Usually the areas of demand, I would say it's more like a circle based. Going up 6th Ave, you're not going to hit that much demand, or 5th Avenue, or 7th. It's really like, if I got to show the actual TLC data with the actual rides, but you'll see the shaded area of, the majority of rides. And there are some really hot spots that drivers can be in. But increasing, each driver's efficiency, will allow more drivers online, which is what we want, because believe me, the apps don't want to lock us out. It does not to their benefit. If they're actually able to have, a couple of cars here, maybe even 50 cars or 40 cars, just roaming around Staten Island, and a rider opens up their passenger app and they see, oh, there's a car. Oh, he's just, 10 minutes away or 15 minutes away. I can order it. I'm not gonna be late to work or late to an appointment or wherever I need to go. But that's not the case right now. I've had actual drivers tell me that in certain areas, Staten Island, other parts of Brooklyn, they have a hard time finding a car or the waiting period's a bit longer. It's more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and that's not efficient, and these riders may just not want to use the app anymore. They're like, oh, it's not reliable anymore, because unfortunately the majority of drivers are able to go online here because that's where I would say over 40% of the rides are coming out of. So the drivers are going to flock there. They're not going to flock to Staten Island, to those parts of Brooklyn, or parts of Queens. They're just going to concentrate heavily on Manhattan, which, the lawmakers don't want. It's the whole reason for the pay rules and the utilization. They want the apps to utilize their cars more efficiently. And when they fall below it, they would have to compensate the driver, for driving around empty. And imagine having 30, 40,000 cars driving around empty, and Uber and Lyft are on the hook to compensate them for that time period that they don't have riders. For example, Juno, since they didn't have much rider demand at the time the pay rules took effect and they lost a lawsuit along with Lyft, they surged. In Manhattan, they were surging. I think it was like between 10 and 20%, like the whole island. I would say this happened because their utilization was down. They weren't maintaining. I think theirs was 50% or 56. It was a bit lower than Uber and Lyft because they were the smaller of the three. But, when they jacked up the prices in Manhattan core, riders are going to open up all three apps. What they're going to see: Juno's more expensive than Uber and Lyft. They're not going to use it. They're going to go with whatever's cheaper, whatever's faster. And in that case, Uber has the most drivers. And I can show you that actually right here. Unique vehicles per month. Sure you can see that. And it's January last year, January 2019. Uber had 79,000 vehicles per month. Lyft had 50,000. Juno had 21. Via had 6,700. And then once the payrolls kicked in, which is right here, I would say between February and March is when it kicked in. You see the little dip. And the little dip has a lot to do with, unfortunately, the trips. Get the trips. And let's go here. The shared rides was another one. Let me show you. The shared rides right here. Between both apps, they were doing 171,000 Lyft shared and Uber pool rides. As you can see, that was in February, and you can see the sharp decline. Payrolls kicked in, so now it drastically dropped, and even more so by January 2020. 90,000. They lost, I would say, 80,000 plus rides, which would have been nice had we been able to maintain that, because you can see consistently here between the year, it was still, they always maintained height. A lot of people order Uber pool, Lyft shared rides, but since the payrolls kicked in, it jacked up the prices a bit. They had the TLC, the MTA congestion fee added in, per rider. I think it was like 75 cents for shared rides. But that really hurt the industry as well. The shared trips prior to the payrolls was 24% of all rides were shared. And that was in February 2019. Once the payrolls kicked in, it dipped. So as of January 2020, sitting at 14%. That's a 10% dip. And same goes here. You can see it. March 2019, when the payrolls kicked in, that's when Uber was at its peak. A lot of people do get their taxes back. They'll go spend, but once the payrolls did kick in, you can see the slight dip in rides. It went from 556,000 rides, all the way down to, in the summertime, down to 449,000. That's 100,000 rides less. November was really busy, not as close as March, but December, not so much. It actually kind of went down. So this all played a factor, and why there's a lot more lockouts. People are more cost conscious, especially those of lower income. They budget their money. They get paid weekly or bi-weekly, and money's tight. So they can't just go splurge like they used to. Because the Uber pools were probably maybe 20% cheaper, and they could afford to take an Uber pool. It would cost them $4 or $5 to go a couple of miles, and to them that was worth it than taking the subway, which was $2.75. And they have to wait, sometimes 10 to 15 to 20 minutes depending on the line they're in. But if the TLC were to implement my idea of splitting up, each individual borough has its own utilization rate, it will allow more cars online. And if they did a peak price, between, I would say, 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., it's on peak. You could charge the normal rates that the TLC has right now. And then after 10, I would say between 10 and 3, this will be the off-peak times. Now with the off-peak times, you could drop the rates maybe, 20% less during these times. It'll be similar to what Long Island Railroad does during off-peak, the tolls, the Midtown, not the Midtown Tunnel, but George Washington, Lincoln Tunnel, Holland Tunnel, and stuff like that. You have the off-peak time, and then at night, I would say after midnight, you could go back to off-peak till 5 a.m. Because, people are going to start going to the airport, usually 5 o'clock. Still not that much traffic, but you got people now traveling because a lot of the flights start leaving out of LaGuardia after 6 o'clock in the morning. JFK is a 24-hour one, but a lot of those business customers are leaving, around this time to go to the airport, get there by 6. So all of this, what this would do is it will spur demand. It will attract those drivers that are cost conscious, that aren't looking to spend too much money. And all that will help, especially with the combination of the utilization per borough you'd be able to probably get, I would say, at least another 20 to 30% more drivers online more often. That way they're making money even during the slow periods. Because right now, during the slow periods, and the TLC, I guess, doesn't have this data. When these drivers are locked out, they're not making any money. So you got a bunch of cars driving around, Manhattan, locked out in parts of Brooklyn because they don't know where the hotspots are. And they're not making no money. So some money, even if it's a little less, 20% less, 30% less, the spur demand will fill in those hours. And, at the end of the shift, if they work 12 hours, instead of before where they were only able to go online maybe 8 hours out of a 12 to 13 or 14-hour shift because they're locked out the other hours, they're able to still make consistently some money. So by the end of their shift, they don't have to work, past the 12 hours or whatever. They could work less simply because they were making more money. Even if they're making, $20 an hour at that point, it's still better than zero. Because remember, they're driving around, burning gas, causing pollution, adding to traffic, and this is all the things that the city doesn't want. So it would be into their best interest to separate the five boroughs, have peak prices, off-peak prices. And another idea I had was Uber Black and SUV have different utilization than X and XL. I believe it's over 80% of all rides are X and XL. I'll just lump them in. And the other less than 20% are Black and SUV. So they're sitting around, a longer time waiting for a ride, in between rides. So they're watering down the utilization rate. So another thing the TLC could do is separate the classes. You got the X with their own utilization because they're about, I think, 58 to 60% of the time an X driver has a passenger in the vehicle. I'm not sure what it is for Black and SUV. I don't have that data, unfortunately. I do drive Black and SUV, and it's different for everyone. Sometimes I could go 2 hours without a ride, and I've had guys with priority on Uber Black go over 3 hours with no rides. And in essence, they're holding down the utilization rate as well. They don't got no rides. So if the TLC were to separate it, give something probably a bit lower for Black and SUV, but separate it from X and XL, and maybe they're able to get on more X drivers, X and XL drivers, because that's the majority, I would say, are locked out. Uber Black, and SUV drivers are a smaller pool, and it's not hard to achieve priority, but there are another thing, that I emphasize is the efficiency of these drivers. You do got Uber Black and SUV drivers, and I know them personally with priority because all they got to do is about 3 to 4 black rides a day, and then they cherry pick. Or they cherry pick the whole day, waiting for that anything over 45 minutes, especially if they got gold, they'll just wait for something that's long distance, that's keeping the utilization rate down. And if you got even 1,000 or 2,000 X drivers waiting for 45 plus, because that's what they used to do with the destination filter. They used to just sit there with the destination filter, aiming to like Boston or Canada or Florida, the Hamptons, deep into Jersey or Pennsylvania, just to get these long rides because they're, some drivers found this much more profitable. They'd rather do one or two to 4 rides a day instead of doing 20 or 25 rides. They find it tedious, so they prefer cherry picking. But all of this just keeps down the utilization rate. Which leads to more lockouts to the drivers that don't have priority, which leads to more complaint, more suffering. A bit worse service for Uber and Lyft, and they can't force drivers to accept every ride because we're not employees, but they could incentivize, they could work out different things, I think, maybe a point system, how they have Uber Pro, and you get 5 points for doing this, a certain ride. They should switch it up to maybe, if you do get a long distance ride, every every 5 miles you get a point or something, or every 20 minutes, every 20 minutes you get a point, and they can build upon that and expand Uber Pro, to something better. If I was in control of Uber, I would probably get rid of Surge completely. And just hear me out, guys. Don't get upset. But if they did get rid of Surge completely, right, and they just made it like a point system, like you'll get 10 points for going to this area of high demand. They can make certain perks, after you reach 100 points or 150 points. You can, when at the end of your shift, you could, spend those points to get a ride that's going, home in your direction, so you don't go home empty. There's something they could work out, and maybe the TLC can make those exempt, while they're waiting for such a ride. But it'll increase efficiency of drivers, as they'll want to gain more points, or they can even spend 200 points to get an Instaping and start at the airport. Especially if they live around there or they're coming by in the morning, they could just go there, use up maybe 200 points, Uber Pro points, cash it out, get a ride to the city. For UberX, the minimum they will make is like $50. Bam, their first hour working, they're already up 50. Instead of driving all the way, because a lot of drivers do live Brooklyn, Queens. They do not live so close to the actual business. You do have a lot of guys that live in Long Island, a lot of guys here in Queens, but there's always traffic here, and always traffic going into the city in the morning. If you're not on the road by 5:30, you're going to hit major traffic. So, there's so many different ideas that I have, but I think that will all help, alleviate the lockouts for drivers, because right now it's the only thing that's preventing the companies from hiring. It would be in Uber and Lyft's best interest if these payrolls didn't exist, to keep flooding the market with more cars. That's just how it works. More cars, to meet the rider demand, to expand the service or whatever, to lower the wait time, before you're picked up. That all, that's to their benefit. The lockout is not to their benefit, but being fined and having to pay drivers or jacking up the price when they fall below utilization is not in their favor. It actually hurts them. And in return, it hurts us, because if they fall below the 58%, they're locking us out, And I would say more than 50% of the fleet is locked out, or 40% at any given time. When it is busy, which I already work the busy hours, so the lockout doesn't affect me. But I know there's so many drivers that don't work the same shift. You know what I'm saying? They just simply can't. And average, I want to show. So there we go. So the vehicles. So last year, January 29, Uber had 79,000 cars. This is per month, and then Lyft had 50,000. You know what I'm saying? But as a combination of both, as you know, drivers log into both, which doesn't really benefit anyone if drivers are logging into both, because you're holding down both utilization. And you'll just go with whatever one gives you a ride first. But if you're cherry picking, now you're causing the utilization rate to go down on both simultaneously. These are the unique drivers per month. I think of May last year, they peaked at 87,000. Now they're down to like 80,000. This is just for the apps. So Uber is at, as of December 2019, they have 71% of the market. Lyft got a little more from Juno when Juno failed. Juno gave their passengers to Lyft. And Via is losing market share. They're down to 3.3 as of December 2019. And as you can see, they were doing a bit better. And then I want to go where the payrolls kicked in. Payrolls kicked in, I would say around March. Really, they were kicked in. And they just started going down. And Juno, went bankrupt. But yeah, it is what it is. But we know how many rides are done per day. There's another thing, guys. If AB5 passes, with the amount of rides that Uber does per day, I kind of did the math, and I don't think they would need no more than 17,000 full-time drivers, and maybe even less if they obviously run them efficiently. So let's hope AB5 doesn't pass. We don't want to be employees, and I'm sure they don't want to be our employer. It's going to add, to 35% more cost to them. On our end, we lose our flexibility, even though it's hurting right now. But I think if the TLC is willing, we can tweak a lot of the, some of the ongoing problems with the payrolls. Because as it stands, it's not benefiting anyone. The more rides Uber and Lyft do, which I think last year they did, I want to say around 100 million. The more tax revenue the city makes in the state, the more money we make. So the more rides these guys do, the better it is for everyone. The more rides we can do, the less lockouts. Everybody wins. We just have to come to a more balanced approach. And I think the city is just the way they're micromanaging this new gig economy is not to anyone's benefit. It's not. And as we can see, they are trying to bail out yellow cabs. I think it was like a $500 million bailout, but now they're being sued for like $800 million by the state attorney general. But you got yellow cabs doing, as of January 2020, they're doing 206,000. Bailing them out with such a large amount of money, and their ridership, the amount of rides per day just continues going down over time. It would be wasteful. I don't think it would save them unless the city intervenes, which what I think they did with the utilization by hurting the apps, and limiting the amount of cars Uber and Lyft can have, with the 58%. They were probably hoping that this would increase demand for yellow and green cab, you know what I'm saying? And for delivery bases, I think they've always historically, throughout time, have struggled. I think they peaked probably at 100,000, but they left the whole market open. That was the whole thing. I think Uber and Lyft, between them, they have over 4 million passengers. And yellow cabs, since they're with the whole medallion system, they're capped. They can't do more than 600,000 rides a day. Capped at 15,000, I think 630 medallions around there, give or take. And they're only catering to Manhattan. You left the whole open market, which why Uber came and dominated, as you can see. They just left money lying there on the ground, and it's really no one's fault. Uber didn't disrupt anything. If anything, Uber has increased ridership, has increased towards the tax revenue of the city and state with each ride. And the Black Car Fund, I'm sure, is sitting on a ton of money. And that's another thing, that should be expanded since they're sitting on so much money. Where we get more benefits, even if we contribute towards it, maybe 2%, maybe if Uber contributes another 2% from their end, not from the passenger's end, and you got 6% going to the fund, but the fund is, paying for sick days if we get sick or vacation, also healthcare, or subsidizing our healthcare, that way we don't have to be dependent on lawmakers trying to step in and regulate the industry by passing an AB5 style bill, which will convert us to employees to get these benefits, and then to, ultimately be unionized. That's the last thing I want. I don't want to be in a union. They haven't kept up with the times. They haven't evolved. So yeah, this is my presentation. I hope you guys now better understand the utilization rate, and how you guys had the whole mix up with the cruising cap, which Uber and Lyft won their lawsuit. That was just pertaining to Manhattan, below 96th Street. And that was going to go down to 31%, I think, by the summer, which would have led to a lot more lockouts, which would have sucked because Manhattan is where the most of my rides are, because I'm a black SUV driver. But thank God it didn't pass. Hopefully the city doesn't appeal, but I've heard Corey Johnson's running for mayor, and he's anti-car, pro-bike, so expect more bike lanes, more enforcement, new laws. I've heard of actually him talking about if you get within 3 feet of a cyclist, it'll be like a $50 fine or something. It's the last thing we want. But anyway, guys, have a good day. If you have any questions, just inbox me. Take care.